That was exciting. It's not what I thought I was about to happen. Man, let me just say this. I don't always do this a lot, but our tech folks and our band and Austin and Emily just ran an entire conference this weekend, pretty much on their own. They did the setup, the tear down, did the trailer again. If you remember trailer days, they did that. All right, and then showed up here and then just led us well with like a true spirit of authentic worship. And I think that deserves some appreciation. Like, I don't know the total number of man hours you guys put in order to lead all of us toward the throne this morning and this weekend, but it's way, way up there, and like kingdom stuff's happening because of you guys. So thank you. That's incredible. Okay. Any of you have been to Chimes Retreat and heard me speak ever? This is going to sound real familiar, all right? But we're going to be okay with that because I love this passage, and it's awesome, all right? So in Luke chapter 8 is a version of a passage that I've actually walked through a lot out of the book of Mark. The Mark version I've talked through a lot, and today we're going to talk through the Luke version. And this is a passage that is, I'll tell you the story of it, but it's been a strange passage that has come up repeatedly in my life and is a big part of the story of why our church exists. And so I want to be able to walk you through that and tell you some of the story. I also recognize that some of it, our church has grown pretty rapidly. We've taken a strategy of multiplication, of not trying to be all centralized where like me and Austin or whatever, like do all the ministry. We're giving it away. And as that happens, multiplication happens. That's the Great Commission of all the believers going and making disciples of all nations. And what that means is that you're connecting with new people, becoming disciple makers, reaching back into your context, engaging people. And so things have multiplied pretty quick. And what that means is that there's probably half of our church, half the people in the room right now weren't here 6 months ago. And then probably 75% of the people in the room were not here a year ago. And like none of you were here 2 years ago because the thing didn't exist, right? And so like I want to just take a moment this morning and walk through the passage, but I also want you to hear some of the backstory of what you've become involved in and what this thing is. I was meeting with somebody who's pretty new to Oaks last week for lunch. We're sitting around talking, and I was like, well, tell me, what do you need to know about me? Like, what do you not know? Because I know I tell stories about myself a lot on Sundays and stuff, but like, like, honestly, man, I don't know. I don't know the backstory of the church. I don't know your story. And so if that's you, I want you to get some of that this morning. But most importantly, I want you to see yourself in this passage. Because I found myself in this passage. And not in a way that I really wanted to, but in a way that has moved me to action. Like reckless abandon and following Jesus. And I want you to get to see that. All right? So Luke chapter 8, we're going to begin in verse 22. And so let me just catch you up on the story thus far until we get there. And I don't throw it up there yet. We're not going to read it yet. All right. And so my wife Jessica and I, if you haven't met her yet, she runs our kids ministry stuff. She's awesome. You should hang out with Jessica. But we grew up in Tuscaloosa. We're Tuscaloosa people. It's my hometown. I was born and raised here, and we've always been here. I went to Bama. I went to University of Alabama as a college student. My 4 years at Bama were a guy named Coach Shula's 4 years, and the reason you've never heard of him because he was terrible, all right? We lost to Auburn all 4 years I was a student here. We lost to Tennessee 3 out of the 4. And then we fired him and hired Nick Saban, and that's annoying because I left. All right, but that's our backstory. So like in high school, middle school and stuff, I wasn't really following Jesus very well. It wasn't really until I got into high school that a couple of men started spending some time in me and investing in me and discipling me, which informs why we do discipleship at Oaks, and my life began to change. These guys came alongside me and showed me what it looked like to have a relationship with Jesus and not just know some answers. They spent time sitting across tables with me, like opening the Word and helping me figure out how to get something out of that. Challenged me to read the Word on my own, and like my entire life, trajectory of my life changed because a couple of people spent an hour a week with me for about 2 years. Changed everything about me. Jessica and I went to Bama, and at Bama, God called me into full-time ministry, and I had to give up on all my plans and the things that I thought I was going to do and rule the world or whatever and give that over to the Lord, and that was hard. Some of you are walking through that. I know what that's like. And then we started praying about what would come next, and I knew I needed to be equipped if I was called to ministry, and so we ended up going out to Texas. Some of you are from Texas, and good for you, man. Like we were there. We were Texas people for like 3 years, bought some boots. Didn't know what to do with them, but I had them, And we spent 3 years out in Fort Worth doing seminary, and then really thought God was going to put us in I thought God was going to put us in Portland before Portland was cool. Like I thought we were going to be in some major world city doing stuff, and then God put us in Huntsville, Alabama, which I don't think I'd ever been to. I didn't even know Huntsville existed. Nobody else did at that point either. God brought us back to Bama, back to the state of Alabama. It was confusing. I was like, I really tried not to go. Like, no, we're going to do big things. We're not going back to Alabama. I got plans, right? God's like, I don't really care about your plans. This is where you're going. And we spent 10 just really fruitful years in ministry, loving on people and sharing the gospel in Huntsville, Alabama. It was going well. It was going great. And really, the wonderful church that we were a part of, and had friends, and our kids had kids they were born with and were growing up alongside. It was just good. There was an ease to it. Some of you recognize how rare it is to find ease in life. I had a gravity to it, but there's something inside Jessica and I so we started feeling like the Lord was starting to pull our roots out of the ground a little bit, but we didn't know what for. We just kept having these times in the Word, and times in prayer, and times in conversation together as husband and wife, where it just felt like God was leading us to a point of surrender, of saying, like, if you want to take us somewhere else, we got to be willing to go. Honestly, at the beginning of that, we weren't. And that season lasted about 2 years, where we felt like God might be calling us into something else, but would not tell us what it was. I was having a conversation with one of the interns this morning at Oaks, and they're like thinking about, going hard, trying to figure out, what am I going to do in 2 years? And I'm like, he ain't going to tell you. Just chill. You're fine. Just do this morning. It'll be okay, right? And we're trying to be faithful in that. We're trying to just do the thing that's set before us, but there was this sense that God was calling us into something different. I didn't know what that was. We just tried to pray and wait. Really hard thing to do. So during that time, I was talking with other pastors and their friends, and I had a few pastor friends in Tuscaloosa, and we were talking about Tuscaloosa and how ministry things were going down here. We had a big student ministry in Huntsville, and we would send a lot of high school students to Tuscaloosa, and none of them connected to community and did very well. It was a problem, so then they quit going to Bama. Anyway, it was a whole thing. And so I'm talking to friends down here. I'm like, hey, so tell me about how Tuscaloosa's going. And repeatedly, the response I would get is like, we need some help. You should move here and help. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Absolutely not. Hard no. You ever told God a hard no? How'd that work out for you? Yeah. So, no, we're not doing that. God's going to call us to crazy stuff, not Tuscaloosa stuff. Yeah. So I had this, a friend of mine, it's actually my cousin, he was a pastor of another church in town, and we had a conversation, and this refrains, I started hearing it in conversations with people, this call to go home, which was the last thing I wanted to do. So we talked about Tuscaloosa, we talked about how it needed more churches, we talked about how Tuscaloosa particularly needed more churches to help engage the college campus, because so few churches were. Other pastors started saying the same thing, and so it went from being a thing I was just disregarding to something that started to sort of stick. But by and large, I pretty much ignored the call. It's not something I was interested in doing. I wasn't hearing what the Lord was saying because I wasn't willing to listen. Back in April 2019, I met a guy named Alan Tate. So if you're a Welcon, you met Alan this weekend, and Alan's like me, but a little bit shorter and doesn't wear glasses. I ended up spending time with Alan in his church in Florence, and we would get people would confuse us when we were preaching. And so I would get done preaching, and people in the back would go tell Alan he did a good job. And he's like, thanks. You're right, I did do a good job. So I met this guy named Alan Tate. We didn't know each other. One of my college students they were at college at UNA, came back for spring break and said, hey, I found this church over here that's crazy. They're making disciples. They're actually doing the thing. You got to meet these people. So I just reached out to try to learn from them. Asked this dude to go to coffee for the first time. It's like a blind date with some guy named Alan. All right? So I'm in a different city from Alan. I'm like, hey, man, you want to get coffee one day? I'll just drive over and just get coffee. And he's like, I don't know you. I'm like, yeah, it's going to be weird. Anyway, so I just went over. We sat down at Turbo Coffee and just had a cup of coffee across the table and was asking him about what they do. And he's telling me about how they'd started this network of churches to try to plant churches in college towns on purpose, to engage the city and turn these churches in these cities into these wayposts next to the river of people that are going to be going through these college campuses so you could reach and engage and equip and send people to change the world. I was like, that sounds pretty fascinating. That sounds strategic. That sounds like the Great Commission. Honestly, I was a little bit annoyed I didn't come up with it. I was a little irritated it wasn't my idea. That seems like something I should have come up with because I'm brilliant, you know? And so he's like, we're doing this. We're walking this out. And so the first one was in Florence, and the second one we planned a couple of years ago in Huntsville. We've been praying about somebody that would plant the third church in the network. There's been a lot of people come and go, like it wasn't the right fit. So that's what we're praying about right now. I was like, cool, man, I'll join you in praying for that other person. And he goes, well, what are you into? What do you care about? I'm talking about, dude, I care about making disciples. I want to see people come to know and follow Jesus as quickly as possible. Give their life to Christ, follow him hard. He kind of looks at me funny, and he said, well, would you pray about planting the third church with us? I don't know if God's in it. I'm not like giving you the job, but like, would you pray about if that's something God would lead you to? And I was like, no. No, Alan. I'm not going to pray about that. Thanks for the invite. Because I had plans. I had big plans. I didn't know what they were yet, but they're going to be big, y'all, all right? And it didn't involve going back to my hometown. But I did. I went home and I started to pray. I didn't want to plant churches because planting churches is hard. Planting churches is risky. Planting churches uproots your family, puts them in a really precarious situation relationally and financially and spiritually. It's hard. I'm not willing to do that. I'm willing to support some other people doing that, but I'm not going to do that. I'm too old for that. I got 3 little kids. We need some stability. I'm out. I got home and told Jessica about it, and honestly, we couldn't help but pray. And so as we prayed, I also started researching a little bit and trying to figure things out. And so I called some of my friends in different college towns, talked to some guys in Tuscaloosa. I started hearing these things that were staggering. Actually, the first place I looked was Mississippi State. I was like, God, if you're calling us to do this, so we send a lot of students to Mississippi State. Seems like a nice place to live, and none of our students plug into Mississippi State well. Maybe that. I couldn't figure it out. Mississippi State wasn't what God was calling us to do. I was like, great, he's not calling us to do this. Fantastic. I don't have to do this. Well, I was in the van. I was in my minivan, which is just a cool way to start a story. And I was in my minivan driving down here to Tuscaloosa for Mother's Day weekend. My mom lives here. She's over there. Jessica's mom lives here. She's over there. We're coming down here to Mother's Day weekend to see the mamas. And I'm fussing about your city. I'm fussing about Tuscaloosa because it's my hometown. You can fuss about your hometown. I get to fuss about my hometown. And I'm like, what is happening? Like every few minutes, another church closes. Like every few minutes, another one of my college students that transferred down there, like they transfer home because they can't find community and they get so messed up spiritually, they just have to go find somewhere else to be. Like, what is going on? Said Jessica, like, I would never send my kids to Bama. It does not seem safe. Like, it is not, never going to do it. Not doing that. And she's sitting over there in the passenger seat, handing people Cheez-Its, not even listening anymore because she's heard all this about 100 times. And she says, man, it sounds like Tuscaloosa could use a few more good churches. And I'm the fool out here researching college towns that could use a few more good churches and hadn't thought about the one town I know something about. And it felt like God had punched me in the mouth and said, hey, dummy, I've been yelling at you for like years. Are you ready to listen yet? So after that, after a lot of praying and a lot of counsel, despite a lot of fear, that's what we committed to do. Plant a new church, Church of the Oaks, in Tuscaloosa, to try to do this with you. Reach and disciple and equip people to be sent out to be disciple makers all over the world. Quit our job in Huntsville with the expectation of zero income in 6 weeks. I got 3 kids, I got a mortgage, and I'm like, well, I don't know. God called us to do it. This is what we got to do. No idea he's going to put the pieces together. And that's how it started. 2 crazy people saying, I guess we have to. Through a lot of the Lord's faithfulness, we're here this morning together. In those early conversations with others, those pastors and those other folks, the text that we're studying this morning came up repeatedly. It was the Mark version of it, but it's the same story. It's Luke 8, chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. It's a story of Jesus encountering this guy that's possessed by these bunch of demons. And they keep pointing that out like it's me. which was annoying. Like when all of your friends keep comparing you to a demon-possessed guy, like you start to worry if things are not okay. You feel me? But this is a story that they came out of. They repeatedly would use it to encourage me to go home, to come here, to share Christ. This is the way the story begins. In Luke chapter 8, verse 22, it says this. It says, one day, Jesus, he got into a boat with his disciples. And he said to them, let's go across to the other side of the lake. So, you're a disciple. Jesus says, we're going across the lake. You go across the lake. So it says they set out. In verse 23, it says, as they sailed, he fell asleep. Because he's Jesus, and he doesn't have to row or something. I don't know. He fell asleep in the back. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and the whole lake's like surrounded by these cliffs. The wind comes over these cliffs and just like slams into the water. Anyway, so the windstorm comes down the lake. They're filling, and the boat's filling with water. And they were in danger. You have it in your head that Jesus never calls you to anything dangerous, that Jesus is only going to call you to safe and comfortable. You should read that verse again. We're going across the lake. And they were literally in danger. Okay? Jesus doesn't call us safe and comfortable. Verse 24, it says when they went and woke him up, saying, Master, Master, we're gonna die. And he's like, fine. Gets up from the nap. Awoke, says he rebuked the wind and the raging waves. They ceased and there was a calm. And he's turned and he says to them, where's your faith? Where's your faith? Says that they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, who then is this that commands even winds and water, and they obey him? Who is this guy, right? Because at this point in the gospel, we haven't gotten a lot of clarity about that. We've been walking through Luke a long time, and it hasn't really been nailed down. Who then is this that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him? The 12 in the boat with him are trying to figure that out. What is happening? I mean, how do you talk to waves? How do you get up annoyed from an afternoon nap and tell a sea to knock it off? And it's just like, oh, sorry, Jesus. We'll be quiet. Who then is this? There's so much that we could say about that. I kind of want to, but we don't have time, all right? And so you're going to get to unpack that and travel a little bit more. But after seeing them do this, these disciples asked this pivotal question. Who then is this that even the winds and the waves obey him? Well, they're about to find an answer. Verse 26 says that they sailed across the lake to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite of Galilee, all right? So this is the eastern shore of the lake. This is a Gentile area. This is not Jewish zone, okay? Jesus has not been in this area in the story yet. The area called the Decapolis, it literally means 10 cities. And so Jesus is he's very intent, willing to go through this storm, put his guys in risk to get across this lake, to get to this Gentile area where nobody knows who he is. Why? Why is Jesus working so hard to get over there? Let's look, verse 27. When Jesus had stepped out on land, he's like, the boat's come to a stop. It slides up the bank. Jesus is stepping out of the boat. When Jesus had stepped out on the land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time, he'd worn no clothes. He had not lived in a house, but he lived among the tombs. Mark 5:5 adds, night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Jesus and his disciples, they arrive on the shore. They're soaking wet. Their boat almost sank. They're terrified and shaking. They're exhausted. They step out of the boat. Jesus gets on land, and immediately this crazy guy comes running down the hill at them. At them. If I'm in the back of the boat, I'm sliding the boat back into the water. I'm like, Jesus, we're leaving, okay, buddy? This is the wrong beach. This is that guy's beach. We're going to go find another beach, okay? Let's go. That's not what Jesus did, all right? In fact, I think this guy is a big part of the reason Jesus wanted to cross the lake in the first place. Think about how awful this man's state is. Think about what those passages said about this guy. He's oppressed by something he can't control. He's alone. He's tortured inside and out. He's living in these tombs. Think about that. Does it sound familiar in your context? Do you know people who are oppressed by things they can't control? Do you know people who feel like they're absolutely alone? Do you know people who, their state, they feel tortured inside and out? And maybe it's a different thing, but does that sound familiar? It does to me. This guy's living in these tombs. Everybody's terrified of him. It's this horrific image. And it's also a picture of Satan's intent to destroy every single person made in God's image. That's a picture of Satan's intent for me and for you. to destroy you, to keep you from the God that you were made for. That place of hope, that place of peace, that place of joy. This place, this Decapolis area, like it's a spiritually dark place. And Jesus intentionally moves towards it. Despite the cost, despite the danger, Jesus intentionally moves to the dark places. I started research in Tuscaloosa. There was an organization that does like kind of Christian conferences in different college towns and stuff. And some of the students that I knew in Tuscaloosa were trying to convince this conference to do this little, Christian concert conference thing in Tuscaloosa one weekend, and they were really pushing back. They really didn't want to do it. And so finally, they're in one of my college students was in a meeting with these people, and they're like, "Listen, the reason we never come to Tuscaloosa, they're in Auburn every year. They go all over the place. Like, the reason we never come to Tuscaloosa is just too dark." Like, okay. I think what we need to be reminded of sometimes is that darkness is no match for the light. And when just a little bit of light enters the darkness flees. And so, yes, Tuscaloosa is a spiritually dark place. Yes, some of your contexts, like your workplaces, are spiritually dark places. Some of you, like the house that you're living in, is a spiritually dark place. There's a lot of things going on. It's hard. Darkness is no match for the light. Jesus intentionally moves towards the dark places. Verse 28 says this. It says, when he saw Jesus, this guy, he sees Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with his loud voice, he's just hollering. He's like, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of him. Like the guy's coming down the hill. Jesus is already commanding the evil spirit to come out of him. The guy gets down to Jesus, falls on his knees in front of him, and starts begging him not to destroy him. It says, for many a time, the spirit had seized him. He was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon back into the desert. The evil in this man can't help but bow before Jesus. There's no match here. It's not even playing field, all right? The evil in this man also knew exactly who Jesus was and shuddered. Remember the question the guys out in the boat asked? Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? See what the demons say? What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? They know. You get the idea that as this guy's running down at Jesus' disciples, Jesus is commanding the spirit to come out, get out of him, but they're going to go no matter what. Jesus is going to win the day. They know there's no match here, all right? But strangely, they start a conversation with Jesus, and Jesus engages in it's no big deal. Like evil is speaking out of this guy to Jesus and talks to him, and Jesus just answers him. It's fine, not stressed out about this at all. Verse 30, Jesus then asked him, "What's your name?" This isn't the kind of "what's your name" where maybe I met some of you this morning and I'm like, "Hey, what's going on? What's your name?" And you're like, "Legion." No, that's not it, all right? That's not how Jesus phrased that. This is like when you're rolling a neighbor and dad comes out. It's more of a demand that you give up your name, it's a different thing. The guy comes running down the hill. "What have you got to do with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Don't destroy." What's your name? The answer says Legion. Mark says because we are many. Again, I'm sliding the boat back into the water. Bye. We'll pick you up later, Jesus, Legion is a military designation of around 6,000 Roman soldiers. So it's Jesus standing in front of an army of evil. And he likes his odds. They start begging Jesus to let them go into this nearby herd of pigs. They could see him, all right? Feed him up on the hillside. So you can get on Google Maps or whatever. There's an area about 2 miles south of an area called Kersey. It's on this lake. And there's a big old tall embankment. And there's this real high kind of plateau thing. And then it terminates into this steep embankment that now doesn't, the lake's small. But anyway, the embankment comes down, this steep embankment down to the water. About 2 miles south of an area called Kersey. You can go check it out. And up on one of those ridge lines, there's this massive herd of pigs. You can see them. They're standing on the beach in the low area. It's pretty over there. You can go like beaches and stuff. You can go on vacation over here, all right? And so they're down there on the beach. There's the crazy guy, there's Jesus, the disciples, the boat's there. But up on the hill, they can see this massive herd of pigs. And this legion is begging Jesus to put him, to send them into the herd. And Jesus, he's like, fine, whatever, fine. Get out of this man, go, fine, go. In an instant, Jesus sends the evil out of this man, right? In an instant, like this poor, like torturous guy is released. I imagine him like falling limp at the feet of Jesus. Jesus grabbing onto him, like easing him to the ground, telling him it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay. I've got you, I've got you, I've got you. The guy's coming back to his senses for the first time in like forever, right? And Jesus has him in his arms, like down there on the beach, right? But in that moment, a couple of seconds later, this sound like raises up off the hillside. This awful noise. The sound of 2,000 stuck pigs. I hate the sound of pig squeal. I don't know why any football team, I don't know any college, like, what is Arkansas doing? Like, come on, you know? I don't want to hang out with pigs. I hate the sound of anyway. I can't imagine the sound of 2,000 stuck pigs. That's the sound that rises up off this hillside. But then that sound is not left there. It's not just the sound of the squeals. It's matched with the sound of hooves. These 2,000 pigs begin to run. They're running straight at that cliff line. Jesus, this man, the disciples, really confused pig farmers, watched 2,000 pigs fly to their death in a lake. Then they had to drown, which that probably took a second, right? And something in you feels bad about that, right? You're like, oh, pigs. But there's a moral question to that, isn't there? There's something you're like, is this okay? But Jesus, the gospel writers, all of them, do not mention it. This is a lot of people's livelihood. There's a giant financial impact of this. This was costly. This was huge. This was detrimental to some other people. This cost them something. But Jesus and the gospel writers give zero attention to the cost. Their undivided attention, Jesus' undivided attention, is just on this one rescued soul. And maybe that's the essential point of the miracle, that in the eyes of Jesus, the rescue and restoration of one person is infinitely more important than the cost. I'll say it again. In the eyes of Jesus, the rescue and restoration of one soul is of infinite more importance than whatever the cost. Jesus, he watches those pigs fly off that cliff. Thought to himself, worth it. I don't think he's unaffected by it. It's worth it. At the lost people in our city and on your campus and in your homes and in your families and in the nations. And he looks at us, recognizing the cost of rescue. Worth it. See, pigs jumping off a cliff makes us feel bad for the people that lost their property. But don't forget that salvation costs a lot more than a few pigs. Salvation, like your salvation, my salvation, costs a lot more than a few pigs, because as Jesus stood on the shore, he knew the day was coming when he was going to pay the real cost of salvation and forgiveness for me and for you. And it was going to be paid not with some pigs, but paid with his life. The sacrifice of those pigs, Jesus says, is worth it. At the sacrifice of his life, he looked at people like me and you, people who had walked away from him time and time and time again, people who are not worth it, right? And he said, yes, they're worth it. He looked at the cross, worth it. The pig farmers didn't agree. Verse 34 says, when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and they told it in the city and in the country, and the people, they come all down the hill. They want to see what happened. They came to Jesus. They found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. It says they were afraid. The report that goes out, the guys run up the hill. They're summoning people from the surrounding area to come see what had happened. They come see something astounding. They see the infamous demon-possessed guy sitting there in his right mind. rescued, like set free. That's a picture of discipleship and salvation, a restored individual, like sitting at the feet of Jesus. This is the thing that we want to see in our own lives and the lives of the people around us. Like, we want to see people come to know him, being rescued by him, and just sit at his feet enjoying him, right? Picture of what we're trying to see happen all over our city and around the world. But the cost of this one guy's salvation scared them. You feel that, like, the cost of this one man's salvation scares them. Verse 36 says, those who had seen it told how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Luke kind of sugarcoats it. Mark tells you more straight up. Mark chapter 5, verse 16 says, those who had seen it described to the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. It says they began to beg Jesus to depart their region. There's something like, what happened to the guy and what happened to my pigs? Verse 37 says that all the people of the surrounding area asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. Now, folks, there is something to beg Jesus for, and that ain't it. The townspeople, they witnessed this insane miracle. They've heard about this guy, right? They've witnessed this insane miracle, but it does not lead to faith. Sometimes some of you are like, I want to see if I just saw a miracle. No, they saw an insane miracle. It did not lead to faith. It led to fear. The herdsmen, they fled in fear, reported what happened, said they described what happened to the guy and to the pigs. Who cares what happens to the pigs? This guy's been like rescued, restored. Like he's been made whole again. They're more worried about their stuff than they are about a person's soul. You see that? They're more worried about their stuff than they are a person's soul. And before me and you get to feel too judgmental about that, we have to have a gut check. Do I care more about my stuff than a person's soul? Are my plans and my preferences, my paycheck, worth it? Are they worth me giving up my plans? Are they worth me giving up my comfort, my safety, my preferences? Are they worth me giving up control and the conditions of where I'm willing to spend the rest of my life? Like, are they worth my finances? Or do I care more about my stuff than a person's soul? Because I'll be perfectly honest with you. I made it explicitly clear to God for years that I was not interested in planting churches, primarily out of fear of not having the stability, of not having the paycheck. It's fear. No, Jesus, the cost is too high. I couldn't possibly accept that call. I couldn't possibly do that. I couldn't possibly be a part of a church plan. I couldn't possibly go to the nations. I couldn't possibly change my major to be more strategic in the kingdom. I couldn't possibly leverage my family on mission. I couldn't possibly do that. Like, the cost is too high, Jesus. No. We don't have the budget for this. These people on the beach are like, man, if every soul costs 2,000 pigs, I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. So the people on the beach, they say what I've felt in my heart sometimes, what we've all felt in our hearts. Jesus, your call is too high. The cost is too high of your call. You may not have explicitly said it. You may not have said it out loud. You may have thought it specifically, but somewhere deep inside your heart, you've said, listen, I just want to stay here and be comfortable. I like things the way that they are. Don't make me give up my thing. Don't make me give up my way of life. Don't make me give up my paycheck. Don't make me give up my pet sin. Don't make me give up my relationship. Jesus, I think it might just be better if you left me alone. Jesus, I want things to stay the way I want them to be. I've got it all planned out. I've got what I need. So if you're trying to make me give that up for them, I don't know. I think the cost is too. I think it might be better for you just to leave me alone. And Jesus, in the passage, Jesus complies. Second half of verse 37 says, so he got in the boat and returned. He didn't get in the boat for fear out of the crazy demon-possessed guy. He got in the boat because some people said, you know what? Too much. Jesus doesn't argue or protest when we say we don't want him. When we're content with our sin, when we're content with our distance, we're content living in our shame, when we're content in our pride saying, I've got it all figured out. I don't need you to be a part of this. He's not going to force himself on you. This is a heartbreaking moment. These people, think about what they saw. People could glimpse the goodness and freedom and mercy of God displayed in this guy's life, and they said, nah, cost too much. They let fear win. Truth is, that happens all the time. I talk with people, I know it happens in your life. It's happened in my life. It happens to us every person who has felt called to lay down their old lives and trust and follow Jesus with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then I'm going to give up the skepticism. I'm going to trust and follow Jesus. For every person who said, I'm just afraid. They've let fear win. It's kept them from knowing Jesus at all. There's probably some people in here like that this morning. There's every person who's felt called by God to leave your nets behind and follow him. Like walk in obedience to the lordship of Jesus and like do the thing he's calling us to do and not just say we know about him, but let fear win. It's kept you in your seat. It's kept your mouth closed. Fear's won. For every person who picks safe and comfortable over Christ, let fear win. You've been letting fear or comfort or sin or anything else keep you from Jesus. My plea for you this morning is to recognize what you're giving up. These people saw the goodness and the power and the mercy and the love of Jesus displayed in this guy's life, and they said, it costs too much. Are you really gonna miss getting to walk in that? Hang on to what you have. So the people, they begged Jesus to leave, and in verse 37, Jesus complies. He's getting back in the boat. God, head out. It's the boat that almost sunk a few minutes earlier, but they're getting back in the boat, and the disciples are, they're ready to go. But there's a commotion. The crowd's kind of gathered around. There's a commotion in the crowd, and the man who had been healed, the man who had been set free, he's pushing his way towards the boat. He's begging too, but he's not begging for Jesus to leave. He's begging to go with him. That's who I want to be. Verse 38 says this: the man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. This response makes total sense, doesn't it? Doesn't that make all the sense in the world to you? This guy's been rescued. He's been set free. Like, people around him clearly don't want anything to do with him. I mean, like, Jesus has rescued him, healed him, restored him. So naturally, he wants to get in the boat too. He's like, I don't know, I'm going with that guy. Forget you fools. Like, I'm going with him, right? Move over, Thomas. I'm getting in the boat. But Jesus does something really unexpected. It says, but Jesus sent him. It says Jesus sent him away saying this. He said, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. Go home. Go home and tell the story. Go home and tell the story of what God has done for you. And so he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. This must have been a shocking moment for him. So many questions, right? Mainly, why? That instant when he's like pushing to get on the boat, he's got one foot in, Thomas is moving over, and Jesus puts his hand on his chest and says, wait. I'm coming. Why? I mean, have there been points in your life? Sorry. Have there been points in your life where you wanted to serve, you wanted to go? You had a plan, you had a direction, and you thought surely the Lord would be in that? And the doors closed, and the answer was no. I've been there. I sat there for about 2 years trying to figure this one out, where I knew God was calling us somewhere, but he wouldn't tell us where. I prayed all the time, Lord, bring us to the place that you're stirring our heart for. I have no idea where that is. Never heard of the Weld Network. Had no idea what any of this stuff was. I'm like, God, just bring us to the place you're stirring our heart for. We'll go. When I started praying that, I didn't mean it. 2 years in, you mean it. Maybe you've prayed your own prayer. You're begging God to do something that just wasn't happening, something that seemed to make obvious sense to you, for an acceptance letter, for somebody to marry, for clarity about what to do with your life, for clarity about what the mission would look like for you, for clarity about how to serve and how to engage and what to do. Like, you're praying these things like, God, make it clear, and we'll do it. This man's begging Jesus for something that seems to make obvious sense, but he did not get the obvious answer. He got the right one. Those are different things. I think far too many of us spend far too much time trying to pick and choose where to go and instead of just sitting and waiting to find out where we're sent. We want to make the plans. We want to line all this stuff out. This guy says, Jesus, I want to go. Jesus says, no, you're sent. You're not going to come with me. I'm going to send you to them. There's something so foundational that's happening in this passage. Like, I don't want you to miss this. Jesus sends who he saves. Foundational. Jesus sends who he saves. It's obvious, it's expected, it's logical that this guy, having met this kind of mercy in Jesus, will go and tell somebody else that story. Jesus sends who he saves. Sending is inherent to salvation. There is no question, if you're a believer in the room, there is no question as to whether or not you've been sent. That thing we do at the end of our services, we ain't playing. Sending is inherent to salvation. If you've been saved, you've been sent. Jesus saw in this guy some incredible opportunity. Not an opportunity to come and be with him, but to go home, to go back to his own people and tell the story of what God had done in his life. People had heard the stories, heard the legends about how awful this guy was and what was going on with him. He can walk in his own right mind saying, that's who I was, but Jesus has changed me. Some of you have that exact same potential. All of you have that exact same potential. Listen, do you have a story of how God has had mercy on you? I do. I wasn't possessed by a bunch of demons, but I have a story of how God's had mercy on me. If you're in the room this morning, you've trusted Christ as your Savior, you've been saved, you've left some old ways behind, and there's some people behind you still living in the same stuff you did, still chasing the same things you did that you know has no hope, has no future, has no joy in it. They need to hear from you that there's something better in him. There's people who need to hear about the mercy that was shown to you. They need to hear it from you and be pointed to him. You're sent. If you're a Christian, you're sent. It's like sending is inherent to salvation. So this guy turns around, is faithful to the calling, not that he wanted, but the calling that he received, to go and share. He went home. I don't know where he's going to call you, but I know he's brought you here. Mark 5, verse 20 says that this guy went away, began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. He made his way through those 10 Gentile cities, telling the story. People recognized the change, recognized what Jesus had done, could not ignore the change in his life. You also have an opportunity, uniquely yours, to do that same thing in the way that he calls you to. It may not be back home. It may be somewhere else. I know for right now he called you here to do this work. I believe he sent you to Tuscaloosa in the same way he sent me for this exact same purpose. If you've lived in Tuscaloosa every day of your life, he sent you to an incredibly strategic mission field. If you've lived in Tuscaloosa 3 months, he has sent you to an incredibly strategic mission field where we're called to go and do the exact same thing. Jesus returns to this area around Mark chapter 7. People are waiting this time because they'd heard the story. I told you I grew up in Tuscaloosa. I wasn't following Jesus well when I was here. And I'd talked for 10, 15 years about how I didn't do a good job of proclaiming the name of Jesus and sharing the story of what he'd done in my life when I was here. And honestly, I feel like he's sent me back. Try to do a better job the second time. I don't want you to have a second time. What's the opportunity he's placed in your life? What's he done in you that somebody else needs to hear? He's sending you to. Listen, there are people all around you who desperately need to hear what Jesus can do in somebody's life, and they need to hear it from your lips. There are people in other college towns who need to hear what's possible. They need to know what discipleship looks like. They need to be invited into those type things. They need to have churches just like the one that you've found to get to be a part of. Some of you started, you're going to start another one. There's other nations where people have no access to the name of Jesus, and we have to go. Some of you are going to be called there. Some of you are going to be called somewhere else. Some of you are going to be called to stay here. I don't know where you're called, but I know what we're called to do. We don't need to spend our time trying to pick and choose and figure out where we're supposed to go instead of just being faithful with what we know. What we know is that we're sent to share the story of what Jesus had done with us. Let him figure out the place. You be faithful to the call. This is the question I want caught in your mind as we close. Is one soul worth it? Are they worth it? Are they worth your preferences? Are they worth the paycheck? Are they worth giving up your plans? Are they worth it? There's a cost of engaging and seeing life change, like in somebody else's life. Like, is that worth it? Sending is inherent to salvation. Like, you have an option. You can either beg him to go or you can beg him to leave. My prayer for you, we beg him to send you. Our band's going to come and lead us in a time of response. And I just want a lot of you, believers in the room, that's who I want you wrestling with. Is one soul worth it? What are the checks in your heart? Like, what are the places where fear is winning and keeping you on the sideline, keeping you from engaging the people around you? Like, are you going to let fear win? Keep your feet planted, keep you keep you still. Like, where are you letting fear win? I want you to wrestle with the Lord with that. And in a minute, our prayer team is going to be back there in the back. I would love for you to have the opportunity to just go say, listen, there's some things in my life, like I'm really worried about this, and I think it's holding me back from engaging in the kingdom. Would you just pray for me about that? Come back to your seat. There's others of you, like you found yourself a little bit earlier in the story. You found yourself in this guy's in the state that he was in before Jesus showed up on the beach that day. When you think about being oppressed and struggling with things that you can't control, like that sounds really familiar to you. You walked in here beat up, you walked in here dark, you walked in here struggling. And I want you to see the way Jesus worked, pressed in, strove to get across that lake to get to somebody just like you. He loves you perfectly. He didn't just cross lakes to get to the lost. He crossed heaven and earth. Dove out of heaven, dove into the earth with us. Lived a perfect life here that you and I couldn't live, to give up his life because he thought that you and I were worth it. I don't think I'm worth it. But he says that my identity is found in him, not in what I think, what I say. You came in here beat up. You came in here feeling like you weren't worth it. Surely that there is a God, he's not interested in you. He's been after you your whole life. He's never left you, never forsaken you, he's never given up on you. You're never going to be able to run so far that he can't find you, draw you home. My prayer for you today is for you to get to feel what this man felt there, being held in the arms of Jesus right there on that beach, set free, restored, at peace, the first time. You want to know what that's like? I know what that's like. You don't need a plan. You don't need advice. You need salvation. You need Jesus. And so in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to do something incredibly bold. As our band leads, I'm going to stand you up in a minute. I want you to walk back there to the back to one of those people standing over there in the corner in our next steps area. And I want you to just go back there and say, listen, I don't have all the answers. I don't know even necessarily what to ask, but I need Jesus. You help me with that. They've found hope too. And they're there to help you. Maybe somebody invited you here this morning and you've seen life change in them. Maybe instead of going back to one of them, you want to grab the person next to you and say, hey, can we talk? I think I need to talk. You just go and leave, all right? You go talk. I want you to know the loving embrace of a Savior. You don't have to walk out of here the way you walked in. So I'm going to pray. Our band's going to lead. And your job is to figure out what your next step is. Whether it's to go and talk, whether it's to set down fear, to take a friend. The only thing you're not allowed to do, unless you want, is to beg him to leave you alone. Let me pray. God, I know in my own life, subconsciously, there's been too many times when fear has won the day. Kept me doing what makes sense. It's kept me doing what was safer and more comfortable. Kept me from speaking up. It's kept me from stepping out. But Jesus, we don't want to be people begging you to leave us alone because the cost is too high. We want to be people begging to go. So I want to pray for my friends in the room who haven't experienced the love and the hope and the joy that you provide. I pray that you'd save them. You'd rescue them. That you'd make them whole again in a way that they've never known before. That you do that in this room right now. Give them the boldness to talk with somebody about what that looks like and to walk through that step with them. And God, I pray for my friends in the room who are struggling with what they're supposed to do and all these plans way far out there in the future. God, I pray that you would just remind them to be faithful to the call that you've given them here. You've called them here. Help them be faithful here. And then when you give us those next steps, when you call us to go, you'll make that clear. God, help us to trust you. My prayer, Lord, is that we would be people that would beg you to go, to be sent. We would refuse to step back in fear and beg you to leave us alone. Lord, move. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen.